There are shipwrecks at the bottom of the ocean that tell stories we were never supposed to hear. Some are military secrets that slipped beneath the waves, others were just never meant to be found because of what they were carrying or how they went down. It was just too disturbing. But thanks to curious divers and deep-sea technology, these wrecks have been uncovered, and what's inside them? Well, let's just say, some things should have stayed lost. They found a ship full of corpses with faces frozen in terror. In 1947, multiple ships in the Strait of Malacca received a chilling distress call. A voice from the Dutch freighter Urang Medan broadcasted, quote, "All officers including the captain dead, lying in chart room and bridge, possibly whole crew dead." Then, after a burst of gibberish, one final message came through, quote, "I die." When a rescue team boarded the seemingly undamaged ship, they found the entire crew dead. Their eyes were wide open, their arms stretched out in defense, and not a single injury was found on their bodies. Right after the investigators boarded, the ship caught fire and exploded. The wreck sank, leaving behind zero evidence, and to this day, no one knows what caused the deaths or if the ship ever officially existed. This ship vanished for over 170 years, and what they found inside was horrifying. The HMS Terror was part of the infamous Franklin expedition, a British mission to the Northwest Passage in 1845. It disappeared along with its sister ship, HMS Erebus. For decades, searchers found only bones and scattered camp remains, some with cut marks suggesting human consumption. But in 2016, the Terror was found perfectly preserved beneath the Arctic ice. Inside, explorers discovered intact china, boots still standing, and even unopened tins of food. It was like the crew had just vanished. The eeriest part? The captain's cabin was locked from the inside. Experts believe the crew became trapped in ice, then slowly succumbed to starvation, madness, and possibly something even darker. When the MV Joyita turned up weeks after vanishing, its entire crew was gone, but their belongings were still there. In 1955, the MV Joyita left Samoa with 25 people on board, and it never arrived. 5 weeks later, the boat was discovered adrift 600 miles off course. The radios were tuned to the distress frequency, the logbook, navigation equipment, and lifeboats were missing, but the crew's luggage, medical supplies, and cargo were untouched. There were no signs of struggle, no bodies, and no explanation. Theories have ranged from piracy to mutiny to alien abduction, but to this day, not one person from the Joyita has ever been found. This wreck sparked an international war over $500 million in treasure. In 2007, a private company called Odyssey Marine Exploration discovered a shipwreck off the coast of Portugal. What they pulled up shocked the world. Over 17 tons of silver and gold coins. But here's the twist. They refused to say what ship it was. Spain sued Odyssey, claiming the wreck was actually a Spanish galleon sunk in 1804 by the British. After a lengthy legal battle, a US court ruled in favor of Spain. Odyssey had to hand over the treasure, but the real mystery is, why was the ship carrying so much wealth in the first place? And, well, was it all there? What would you do if you found yourself caught in one of history's deadliest evacuations at sea? On January 30th, 1945, as World War II raged on, the MV Wilhelm Gustloff was pressed into service as an evacuation ship on the Baltic Sea. Originally built as a cruise liner, she was repurposed to transport refugees, wounded soldiers, and civilians desperate to escape the advancing Soviet forces. In a cruel twist of fate, a Soviet submarine torpedoed the vessel, and within minutes, the ship's modest hull was overwhelmed by icy waters. Despite being small compared to ocean liners of its day, the Gustloff carried nearly 10,000 souls, a staggering number considering the chaos unfolding on board. Many of those aboard were innocent families caught in the desperate scramble for survival, and this tragedy, often overlooked in the annals of wartime history, remains the deadliest maritime disaster disaster ever recorded, shrouded in mystery and the bitter realities of war. Ever wondered how a seemingly minor collision could ignite one of the deadliest disasters at sea? On the foggy night of December 20th, 1987, in the Philippines, the overcrowded MV Doña Paz set out on what should have been an ordinary voyage. Instead, she collided head-on with the oil tanker MT Vector. The collision instantly sparked a raging inferno, and within moments, both vessels were engulfed in flames. Over 4,000 lives were lost in this horrific accident, many of them unsuspecting passengers who had boarded the ferry without a hint of the impending doom. What makes this disaster even more chilling is the fact that the Doña Paz was so overloaded that official records barely accounted for all of the people on board. Amid the chaos, rescue operations were rendered nearly impossible by the explosion's sheer intensity. The MV Doña Paz disaster stands as a reminder of how neglecting safety measures and overcrowding can turn a routine journey into an unimaginable nightmare. Can you imagine a steamboat explosion on America's mighty rivers, claiming a death toll that outstripped the Titanic's? On April 27, 1865, the SS Sultana embarked on a journey along the Mississippi River, carrying soldiers returning home after the Civil War. Overcrowded far beyond her capacity, the vessel's boilers suddenly exploded without warning. In a flash, the ship was ripped apart and pandemonium ensued as passengers scrambled for safety in the rushing waters. The explosion claimed more than 1,800 lives, many of whom were young men who had already sacrificed so much on the battlefield. A lesser-known detail is that the SS Sultana's boiler design had been a ticking time bomb from the start, and warnings about overcrowding had been ignored in favor of profit. The catastrophic loss of life on that day not only devastated countless families, but also exposed the grave dangers inherent in early steam-powered travel, making the SS Sultana one of America's most under-discussed maritime tragedies. What happens when a grand ocean liner meets a hidden iceberg of misfortune in a narrow river? On the night of May 29, 1914, the RMS Empress of Ireland, celebrated for its elegance and modern amenities, was navigating the fog-laden St. Lawrence River. Without warning, the liner struck a submerged object that compromised its watertight compartments. Within a mere 15 minutes, the majestic vessel began to list uncontrollably, and panic spread among its passengers. Over 1,000 lives were lost in this swift disaster, a tragedy that unfolded far from the open ocean and in conditions that offered little room for escape. What makes this event particularly heartbreaking is that many of the passengers were caught completely off guard, enjoying a leisurely cruise before being thrust into a fight for survival. Though it never captured the global imagination like the Titanic did, the Empress of Ireland's sinking is a grim chapter in maritime history, marked by the quick nature of its demise and the profound impact on those who survived and those left behind. Have you ever heard of a ship so poorly maintained that a day meant for celebration turned into a deadly catastrophe? In the summer of 1904, the SS General Slocum set sail from New York Harbor, loaded with churchgoers excited for a picnic cruise. What was meant to be a joyous outing quickly turned into a nightmare when the aging vessel caught fire and capsized in the East River. In a matter of minutes, over 1,000 lives were extinguished in a blaze that left survivors in shock and a city in mourning. Eyewitnesses recalled the terror as the ship's deck became a chaotic scene of panicked passengers, many of whom had no idea how to react to the sudden disaster. A particularly chilling detail is the fact that the SS General Slocum lacked basic safety features such as adequate lifeboats and proper emergency protocols, oversights that directly contributed to the scale of the tragedy. This disaster not only reshaped New York's maritime regulations, but also serves as a lasting testament to the importance of safety in an era of industrial progress.
Our first story takes us to the Baltic Sea and to one of Sweden's most powerful warships.
the kronan. In 1676, during the Battle of Åland, the kronan attempted a sharp turn while its gun ports were open. The ship capsized, gunpowder ignited, and the vessel exploded. More than 800 people passed within minutes. For centuries, the wreck was considered unrecoverable. Then, in 1980, divers found the ship sitting 30 meters below the surface, and what they discovered inside was as unsettling as it was historically valuable. Skeletons, hundreds of them. Many were partially articulated, some were found near cannons, others near collapsed beams. The mud and cold water preserved these remains so well that researchers could determine injuries, ages, and even identify personal belongings. Archaeologists also found hundreds of barrels of preserved food, including butter and cheese, that still held their shape. One diver described the interior as a silent, preserved disaster, a moment from 1676 frozen in place. Kronan remains one of the largest underwater grave sites ever studied. The USS Independence was a light aircraft carrier used during nuclear tests in the late 1940s. Because it had been repeatedly exposed to radiation, the Navy decided to scuttle the ship in 1951 off the coast of California. For decades, the exact location remained uncertain. Then, in 2015, researchers located the wreck nearly 2,000 feet below the surface. When remotely operated vehicles entered the vessel, they found something no one expected. Parts of the ship were completely intact. Hallways were still recognizable, aircraft parts were piled in storage, but the most surprising discovery came from sealed containers inside the wreck. These containers held Navy documents that had survived underwater for more than 60 years. The contents have never been fully released to the public. Historians believe they relate to Operation Crossroads, the nuclear tests that exposed the ship to radiation. What disturbed divers the most was the eerie preservation of personal items: boots, a bent cot frame, plates still stacked near a mess table. The ship had been a testing tool, but exploring it felt like entering a Cold War time capsule that had been deliberately sunk and sealed away. In 1545, during a battle between England and France, the Mary Rose suddenly capsized in the Solent. Witnesses watched it sink almost instantly. Around 500 men were trapped inside, and when the wreck was raised in 1982, it became one of the most significant maritime recoveries in history. What archaeologists found inside was both extraordinary and unsettling. Hundreds of personal items were still exactly where sailors had left them. Wooden bowls neatly stacked, dice on the floor, shoes lined up near hammocks. A surgeon's full medical kit, including bone saws and ointments, sat open as if someone had been mid-procedure. The most disturbing find was the arrangement of human remains. Many skeletons were discovered tangled in narrow passageways or pressed near closed hatches. One young crewman was found near the orlop deck, positioned as if he had been holding onto a support beam during the ship's final moments. The Mary Rose provided one of the most detailed and haunting snapshots of life and death inside a 16th century warship. In 1717, the Whydah galley, a ship once used in the Atlantic slave trade, was captured by the pirate Samuel Bellamy. It became one of the most successful pirate ships in history. Later that same year, it sank in a violent storm off Cape Cod. For over 2 centuries, it remained a legend. Then, in 1984, explorer Barry Clifford found it. The wreck turned out to be the only authenticated pirate shipwreck ever discovered. Inside were thousands of artifacts, including gold, weapons, and personal items. But what shocked historians most was the discovery of human remains. Several bones, including a femur and a partial skeleton, were found encased in hardened sediment, along with coins and jewelry. These remains proved that when the ship went down, men were trapped inside the hull. DNA testing later attempted to confirm whether one of these bones belonged to Bellamy himself, but the results were inconclusive. In 1628, the Swedish warship Vasa set sail on its maiden voyage. It traveled barely 1,500 meters before a gust of wind hit, the ship leaned, water rushed in, and the vessel sank right in Stockholm harbor. Because the water was cold and brackish, the ship remained astonishingly intact. When the Vasa was raised in 1961, it looked almost new. But the things found inside were a chilling reminder of how quickly it went down. Several crew members were discovered inside the hull, including the skeleton of a young woman, believed to have been on board without authorization. Researchers also found the remains of a dog that had traveled with the crew. Many skeletons showed signs of sudden drowning. Thousands of personal items were preserved, bags filled with coins, belts, clothing with visible stitching, even food scraps. The Vasa is one of the most complete 17th century shipwrecks ever recovered, and the presence of both people and animals inside paints a clear picture of the ship's final seconds. What would you do if you were on a ferry that sank in the blink of an eye, trapping nearly 2,000 souls in a watery grave? On September 26, 2002, the MV La Joola, a Senegalese government ferry, departed on a routine journey across the treacherous waters near the Gambia. Overloaded well beyond its capacity, the vessel was ill-prepared for the sudden onset of a violent storm. Structural weaknesses and the sheer weight of excess passengers caused the ship to capsize almost immediately, engulfing approximately 1,863 lives in the turbulent sea. Amid the chaos, many passengers were left without life jackets, and rescue efforts were hampered by the storm's fury. A little-known fact is that the overcrowding had long been a known issue. Warnings from crew and inspectors were repeatedly ignored in favor of meeting strict schedules and cutting costs. The MV La Joola disaster is a sobering example of what can happen when safety regulations are sidelined, resulting in one of the deadliest maritime tragedies of the modern era. Could you imagine a shipwreck where the victims were prisoners of a living nightmare, lost during the final days of a brutal war? In the waning moments of World War II, the SS Cap Arcona, once a luxurious ocean liner, was repurposed to transport concentration camp prisoners and civilian internees. On May 3, 1945, while docked, the vessel was bombed by Allied forces in a tragic case of mistaken identity and wartime chaos. Over 5,000 souls were caught in the blast, their fates sealed in the confusion of one of history's most hidden disasters. What's particularly harrowing is that many of those aboard had already endured unimaginable horrors, and their final moments were marked by confusion and terror as the ship was engulfed in flames and shattered by exploding munitions. The story of the SS Cap Arcona is cloaked in secrecy, with many of its details lost in the fog of war, yet its legacy remains a reminder of how the cruelty of conflict can extend even to those who are most vulnerable. What would you say if I told you a lavish passenger ship capsized in the heart of a bustling American city, turning a day of celebration into pure chaos? On July 24, 1915, the SS Eastland, a beautifully designed vessel famed for its luxurious interiors, was hosting a company picnic along the Chicago River. In an unexpected twist of fate, the ship suddenly began to list and then capsize, trapping hundreds of passengers in a disastrous overturn. In less than a minute, 844 lives were lost as the once majestic boat became a death trap in the midst of a thriving urban setting. The disaster was compounded by the fact that the ship's design had been compromised by modifications that made it dangerously top-heavy, a detail that only came to light after the tragic event. Eyewitnesses described the scene as one of utter pandemonium, with cries for help echoing along the riverbanks. The SS Eastland tragedy not only upended the lives of those aboard, but also forced a nationwide reckoning with maritime safety and engineering standards. Have you ever wondered how a state-of-the-art ferry could transform into a floating inferno in mere minutes? In the early hours of February 3, 2006, the MV Salam Boccaccio 98 set out on what was expected to be a routine crossing of the Red Sea near Sudan. Despite its modern appearance, the vessel was grossly overcrowded and lacked sufficient safety measures. As the ship sailed through increasingly severe weather conditions, water began seeping in at an alarming rate. In a matter of minutes, the ferry turned into a chaotic disaster zone, and a catastrophic fire broke out, consuming over 1,000 lives in its wake. Eyewitnesses recalled the terrifying moments as passengers scrambled desperately for any semblance of safety, while the crew struggled to manage the unfolding calamity. A particularly lesser-known detail is that, despite its modern construction, the vessel had not undergone rigorous safety drills or equipment checks, failures that ultimately sealed its fate. This ship's disaster serves as a chilling reminder that technological advancements advances mean little without strict adherence to safety protocols. What if a supposedly modern ferry met its icy end in the dark, stormy Baltic Sea, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions and heartbreak? On the night of September 28, 1994, the MS Estonia set sail across the Baltic with high hopes and cutting-edge design. However, as a fierce storm raged, the vessel began to list uncontrollably. Within minutes, a catastrophic failure of the bow door allowed water to flood in, and the ship broke apart in the freezing depths. A total of 852 passengers lost their lives in a disaster that shocked even the most seasoned maritime experts. Survivors recounted a surreal scene of chaos where clear skies turned to darkness and the promise of safety quickly evaporated. Investigators later revealed that a combination of design flaws and communication failures during the crisis had contributed significantly to the rapid sinking. The MS Estonia remains one of the most baffling maritime disasters of modern times, a stark testament to how even the most advanced ships can fall victim to nature's fury when proper safeguards fail. In our number 6 spot today, we have the SS Kiangya. On December 4th, 1948, this ship was carrying thousands of passengers who were fleeing Shanghai due to the advancing People's Liberation Army. On this day, the official number of passengers was said to be 2,150, which was already almost double its capacity rate, but it said that several thousand more people crowded onto the ship before it left the docks. I mean, this makes a lot of sense. It's weighing the risk of packing onto this boat versus staying in the situation you're currently trying to flee. As the ship got to the mouth of the Huangpu River, it is believed that it may have struck some sort of World War II era mine or something like that because it just exploded. Rescuers were also unaware of the explosion for hours, which only made the situation worse. Somewhere around 700 passengers were rescued, but this meant that a number estimated to be from 2,750 to as many as 4,000 people lost their lives in this explosion and the subsequent sinking of the ship. Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have Mont Blanc and Emo. Halifax is a port city that is located here in Canada in the province of Nova Scotia. Halifax was a super important place during the First World War as it acted as a hotspot for ships that were carrying supplies, troops, ammunition, war stuff. On December 6th, 1917, a Norwegian ship called Emo left Halifax and it ended up colliding with a French ship called the Mont Blanc. This is already disastrous, but it was made significantly worse by the fact that the Mont Blanc held explosives. Because of the collision, the Mont Blanc was pushed towards the shore and ended up setting the harborfront ablaze. Just a few minutes later, the entire ship exploded with a blast so strong that windows 50 miles away were shattered. Unfortunately, there were many people at the waterfront when the explosion happened, which led to 1,800 people dying in this accident. 9,000 people were injured, and it is said that 1,600 homes were destroyed in the blast. The force of this blast really cannot be understated. It was so powerful that it caused a tidal wave and violent tremors, which were able to uproot trees from out of the ground. They damaged railroad tracks, and they destroyed numerous buildings whose debris was scattered for hundreds of yards. In the end, this is what made this explosion one of the most violent non-nuclear explosions in history, and what makes it likely the world's largest accidental man-made explosion. In our number 9 spot today, we have the Toya Maru. This ship was a Japanese train ferry that was out to sea in between the islands of Hokkaido and Honshu in 1954 when it was struck by Typhoon Marie. The captain tried to ride it out and attempted to anchor the ship in place, but the winds were so strong that it broke free. Seawater began pouring into the engine compartment, which then caused the steam engine to quit running, and the ferry was then completely uncontrollable. The captain continued to try whatever he could to get the ship to safety, and he even tried to beach the ship, but unfortunately the waves were just too powerful. After being tossed around in the waves and battered by the water, and after all the rain and strong winds, the ship ended up capsizing and sinking. In the end, 1,163 people lost their lives in this disaster, including 35 American soldiers who were members of the US Army's 1st Cavalry Division Artillery. The Toya Maru wasn't the only ship sunk in this storm, as Typhoon Marie also sank 4 other ferries as well. In our number 8 spot today, we have the Taiping steamer. In 1949, the Taiping steamer was out to sea and was seriously overloaded with 1,000 war refugees on board. This ship was sailing from Shanghai, China to Keelung, Taiwan when it collided with a cargo vessel called the Qianyuan. At the time of this accident, the Taiping was fleeing the Chinese Civil War, which is why it was so overcrowded when it only should have been holding a maximum of 580 passengers. This kind of overcrowding did not help with the sinking of the ship and sadly only sped up the process. It is also said that the ship was steaming without lights even though it was after curfew, which of course likely didn't help to avoid this very tragic situation. Sadly, there were 1,500 people who lost their lives in this collision. In our number 7 spot today, we have the SS Principe Umberto. This ship was built in 1909 as an Italian passenger ship, but in the times during the First World War, it ended up being converted into an armed merchant cruiser. On June 8, 1916, this ship was transporting troops on the Adriatic Sea. These troops were part of the 55th Infantry Regiment and were on their way back from Albania to Italy. Although the ship was accompanied by others, it still ended up being struck by an Austro-Hungarian U-5 submarine that had launched a torpedo attack. This ship ended up sinking just minutes later, and it is said that this disaster took the lives of 1,926 men, making it the worst naval disaster of the First World War in terms of lives lost. In our number 6 spot today, we have the Yamato. This ship was a Japanese battleship that served in the Second World War. She was the lead ship of her class of battleships, and she was one of the 2 of the heaviest and most powerfully armed battleships ever constructed. On April 7, 1945, the ship was about 300 kilometers south of the Japanese island of Kyushu when it was confronted by a US carrier-based aircraft. This aircraft bombed the ship, which led to it capsizing. This then caused the ammunition on board to explode, which tore the ship in 2. After a total of 13 torpedo hits and 8 hits, the ship completely sunk. The ship was accompanied by a light cruiser and 4 other destroyers, which were all sunk in this event as well. This sadly led to thousands of deaths, as most of the crew lost their lives in this battle.
Coming in at number 10, we have the Mornak Ship Graveyard in Uzbekistan. This ship graveyard showcases the destructive power that man can have on his environment. This area used to be lush with life, and it was home to the Aral Sea. This was a massive salt lake that housed one of the most diverse ecosystems in the world. It was teeming with life not just below the surface but above it as well. There were thousands of people that called the borders of this sea home. It was where people would fish and live. An entire industry was built around this lake, but when the government wanted to use the waters to expand the agriculture influence in the area, they started to funnel water out of the lake through the man-made rivers, and slowly but surely they shrank down the sea and the salt levels skyrocketed. It was eventually too salty for anything to live in the lake. Eventually everything died off, and everyone who used to live around there had to find other means of survival. Now the whole area is a desert that houses the rusted remains of ships that once traveled the Aral Sea. Coming in at number 9, we have Miss World Discoverer Solomon Island. This is the worst nightmare for every single retired person who loves to spend their time going on cruises. In the 70s, the Miss World Discoverer was working as a cruise ship, and while swooping by the Solomon Island, the captain made a huge mistake. He came too close to the island shore and hit a massive rock which pierced through the hull of the ship. So what happened to the 2,000 people that were on board the ship? Well, they were all eaten by sharks, and now the place is called the Shark Graveyard. I'm just kidding, that didn't actually happen at all. Actually, not a single person died. Everyone on board managed to make it to the lifeboats, they made it to the shore of the island, and then the island had an operating ferry for tourists to visit. This was all very convenient. So it took a few trips, but they were all able to make it home safely. Coming in at number 8, we have the Mediterranean Sky in Greece. Let's go over to a massive cruise liner that was built all the way back in the 50s. I'm not sure how long a boat is good for, but it would weird me out knowing that you're setting sail on something that is older than my parents. I think when I'm putting my faith in something that's supposed to take me across the ocean, I want to make sure that the blueprints have the latest updates. But even though this ship had a long career, it never saw any problems. The reason that it became a wreck was actually due to lack of use. It was sitting in a Greek harbor for over 2 years, and then one day the ship started to take on water. I don't know if you guys know this about boats, but that is very bad. Well, the owners of the boat didn't have the means to fix it, but they also didn't want to lose it to the murky depths of Davy Jones' locker. So they managed to get the boat to some shallow waters, and they got it stuck on land. It stayed there for a time until the boat broke open, and then it was laid there as a wreck. It's now a tourist attraction. I'm kind of realizing that going to see a giant shipwreck is like going to check out a big piece of garbage, but I still want to go for some reason. Coming in at number 7, we have the Bessie White from Fire Island, New York. That sounds like the most brutal place to be shipwrecked. Fire Island? It sounds like there would be an active volcano there and a bunch of locals there that want to tie you up and take you to the mouth of the volcano so they can sacrifice you. But it turns out it's actually a pretty peaceful place. The Bessie White was an old schooner that was mainly used to haul coal throughout America. It's a tough job, but someone's got to do it. The ship crashed off the coast of the island in the 20s, and a pretty penny worth of coal was lost to the world, and I bet a bunch of people were fired that day. You don't make a six-figure mistake and then just walk into work the next day like nothing happened. For a long time, the boat was gone to the world, but the changing shorelines revealed where it was left. You can go visit the boat whenever you want, but you just have to make it to Fire Island, so that might be a pass for me. Next on the list, we have the SS Maheo on Fraser Island, Australia. This ship was originally a Navy ship, but it came in contact with a very intense cyclone, and now it sits on the shore of Fraser Island. The metal skeleton sits on the beach and looks just as dangerous as it is. Some people think that it would be a good idea to climb and enter the wreckage, and many of them learn quickly that there's nothing in there but pain. Many people have hurt themselves in the wreckage of the ship trying to get too close for photo ops or the perfect selfie. And it doesn't help that Fraser Island is already known for being dangerous from the aggressive wildlife that lives on the island. So if you go there for a visit, try not to draw blood while you explore. You don't want a pack of dingoes to be the last thing you see.
This luxury liner went down in one of the strangest maritime collisions ever. The Andrea Doria was an Italian ocean liner, one of the most glamorous of its time. But in 1956, just a day from arriving in New York, it collided with the Swedish ship Stockholm. Even though both had radar, the Andrea Doria sank slowly but still claimed 46 lives. Divers who explored the wreck years later described eerie scenes: chandeliers still hanging, toys floating in cabins, and wine bottles perfectly intact. Stranger still, the collision should have been avoidable. Both captains claim they saw the other ship, but just misjudged the situation. Some even suspect that miscommunication wasn't the only thing to blame. This World War II German sub was supposed to be at the bottom of the ocean, but it's not there. For years, Germany believed the U-869 was sunk off the coast of Morocco during World War II, but in 1991, recreational divers off the coast of New Jersey stumbled on a mysterious submarine, one that didn't match any Allied models. After years of diving and documentation, they confirmed the unbelievable. This was the U-869. No one knows why it was thousands of miles off course. The sub was sealed tight with the crew likely still inside. To this day, experts are baffled by its final voyage. Was it sent on a secret mission, or could it have been sabotaged? This sunken World War II ship could still explode and take an entire town with it. The SS Richard Montgomery sank in 1944 just off the coast of Kent, England. It was carrying over 6,000 tons of explosives, and when it went down, 1,400 tons of them remained trapped inside. The shipwreck is still there today, and it is deteriorating. Government reports warn that if the munitions ever detonate, the blast could destroy a nearby port town, flood the Thames estuary, and cause mass casualties. But also removing them is too risky, so instead they just watch it. It's quite literally a ticking time bomb just sitting beneath the waves. Everyone knows the Titanic, of course, but its sister ship's wreck is even more mysterious. The HMHS Britannic was supposed to be safer than the Titanic. We've heard that before. It was redesigned with extra lifeboats and reinforced hulls, but in 1916, while serving as a hospital ship, it struck an underwater mine near Greece and sank in just 55 minutes, even faster than the Titanic. One nurse was famously sucked into the propellers while trying to escape. The wreck was discovered in the 1970s lying on its side, remarkably well preserved. Divers have found medical equipment, surgical tools, and even stretchers still strapped in place. The weirdest part is that no one knows how it sank so fast, even with all of its safety upgrades. This shipwreck is so valuable it triggered a modern-day treasure war. The San Jose was a Spanish galleon sunk by the British in 1708 near Colombia. It was carrying one of the richest hauls ever, over 200 tons of gold, silver, and emeralds. It became known as the Holy Grail of shipwrecks, and in 2015, Colombia finally found it. But instead of celebration, chaos followed. Spain claimed it. Indigenous groups claimed it. Treasure hunters who had been searching for years also claimed it. With over 17 billion in treasure still underwater, lawsuits and secrecy have clouded its fate. To this day, Colombia keeps the exact coordinates classified because they know people will try to take it anyway. When divers found this ship in the Great Lakes, they weren't prepared for what was still inside. In 1927, the SS Kamloops vanished in Lake Superior during a brutal snowstorm. It wasn't found until 50 years later in 1977. When divers explored the wreck, they found something chilling, literally. One crewman's body was still there, perfectly preserved, suspended in the engine room. His eyes were open, his skin had turned a waxy white, and he simply became known as the Frozen Man. Thanks to the cold, dark waters of the lake, he hadn't really decomposed. The Kamloops remains one of the eeriest wreck dives in North America, and the Frozen Man is apparently still there today.
Coming in at number 6, the SS Andrea Doria. Sometimes referred to as the Mount Everest of scuba diving due to its location 180 feet under the waves, this ship became famous after a terrifying accident that led to her sinking almost 70 years ago. The fateful day was July 25th, 1956, and the Andrea Doria, a luxury transatlantic ocean liner, was about to reach the coast of Nantucket when it accidentally collided with an incoming ship. Upon impact, the ship began to tilt severely, and many lifeboats were left unusable. However, thankfully, many of its passengers were rescued and brought to safety, but not all of them. The incident made major headlines at the time, mostly as a success story, but to this day there are still many who claim the shipwreck is cursed by the 47 passengers who never made it out alive. Those that have passed by report feeling the sensation of being touched or yanked by an unseen entity, and some sailors even claim to have seen full-on apparitions of the dead floating around the area. Next up at number 5, St. Peter. It was in October of 1898 when the vessel of St. Peter was attacked by a storm on Lake Ontario while delivering coal from Oswego to Toledo. The crew attempted to brave the storm for 12 hours in the face of 20-foot waves, but sadly they were no match for the treacherous conditions, and by the time rescuers arrived, all 7 crew members along with the captain's wife had drowned at sea. Tragically, the only person left standing was the captain himself. Today it is said that the spirits of the drowned sailors haunt the area, terrifying anyone who passes nearby. But it's the ghost of the captain's wife Martha who you really want to make sure you stay away from, as it's said that one look into her eyes will curse you for the rest of eternity. Coming in at number 4, the Flying Dutchman. So before I get into this next one, I have to be honest and say that this is more of a legend than an actual confirmed shipwreck, but it's terrifying nonetheless, and who's to say it can't be real? First noted in the late 18th century, the first accounts of the legend of the Flying Dutchman describe the apparition in connection with the crew of a Dutch ship lost off the Cape of Good Hope in a storm, perhaps as punishment for some kind of horrible crime. But as time went on, sightings continued. King George V described seeing a ship glowing with a strange red light off the coast of Australia in 1881. Then in March of 1939, about a dozen people claimed to see the vessel off the coast of South Africa. And during World War II, German Admiral Karl Donitz said that members of the crew of one of his U-boats had seen the Dutchman while patrolling off Cape Town. But what exactly were the terrifying sightings, you ask? Well, some reports mention a crew of skeletons dancing in the rigging, while others warn that the ship has the ability to lure other vessels into the rocks, as supposedly the captain is jealous of other ships who might pass the Cape, and will do everything in his power to prevent them by ensuring their death in a storm. Coming in at number 3, RMS Rhone. Reportedly one of the most haunted wrecks in history, the tales about the RMS Rhone are about as disturbing as you can imagine. In October of 1867, while traveling through the Caribbean, the captain saw an unexpected storm ahead. Now initially, he was not concerned as it was well past hurricane season, and he even accepted passengers from another smaller ship to be transferred, as the Rhone was regarded as unsinkable. But Of course, the story doesn't stop there. The skies became gray and the storm hit the ship, but it wasn't until the clouds cleared that the captain realized how wrong he had been. He was in the eye of the hurricane. In an effort to keep the now hysterical passengers safe, he ordered they be tied to their bunks. But as it turns out, he couldn't have made a worse decision. Soon a giant wave came crashing over the ship, sending it flying for the rocks and allowing seawater to rush in and fill the hot boiler room. The result was a massive explosion that ripped the ship in two. And since nearly all the passengers were tied down, the incident cost an estimated 250 people their lives. These days, those that have visited the area complain of frightening moans and groans coming from the wreck, and some divers claim that they've been grabbed by something only to turn around and there be nothing near them in sight. Coming in at number 2, the SS Emperor. The SS Emperor was the largest ever Canadian-built ship at the time of her launching in 1910. But from the time of her launch, the Emperor suffered from bad luck, which remained the case until its eventual sinking in 1947. On its last day, the Emperor left Thunder Bay with a cargo of iron ore, and the captain gave control of the ship to his first mate, who had overseen loading the ship earlier that day. Now, some say it was fatigue of being overworked, while others claim there was some kind evil spirit afoot already, but the ship ran aground at around 4 in the morning and sank within 30 minutes, killing 12 people, including the captain and the first mate. Ever since, divers claim to have seen evil spirits like the ghosts of the Emperor's perished crew members still at work. Some have even reported hearing the voices chant "die, die, die" as they chase you back to the surface. And last up in our number 1 spot, the Alkimos. Once a Greek-owned merchant ship that became stranded along the Western Australian coast, the Alkimos wreck has long been revered as a spooky and even cursed location. Reports include apparitions of a small dog in the engine room, footsteps on ladders when no one's there, a human figure in rubber boots, nicknamed Harry, and Morse key clatters in the unoccupied radio room. But those are a far cry from the real dangers it holds. One curse has to do with the legend that the welders were sealed between the hulls of the ship when it was still under construction, and that their angry, vengeful spirits haunt the wreck seeking out revenge. But the scariest spirit is the mysterious crew member who killed a radio operator on board before taking his own life. It's said his full apparition can be seen wandering around the wreck, and legend has it that anyone who gets too close to the ship will be possessed by his evil spirit and forced to commit the same crime that sent him to his death. So, unless you have an exorcist on speed dial, then this is probably not the place for you.
Next on the list is the USTA Liberty in Bali, Indonesia. Now we're finally getting to a battleship. The USTA was smashed in the hull by a Japanese torpedo in 1942 just off the coast of Bali. It was extremely close to the shore, only 30 meters away, so most of the men on board were able to abandon ship and swim to the shore. And even though the ship has a dark past, it is now a prime time location for snorkeling and freediving. The wreck is only 9 meters underwater, so you can swim right out to it and dive down to find a wide array of sea life living on it. That's not a bad way to spend your afternoon, just have to forget that it's down there because of World War II. Coming in at number 4, we have the AA Airfield. At first glance, this ship looks like it was set up for an apocalypse movie, but you will quickly learn that it's actually just one of the most beautiful wrecks ever. It's just off the coast of Australia, and even though the ship is a giant hunk of dead metal, life has chosen it as a spot to create. There are trees growing out through the hull of this dead ship. They reach out through the top of the wreckage. Something that used to be a giant hunk of garbage has now become a marine and vegetation sanctuary. Coming in next on the list, we have the SS Thistlegrom in the Red Sea, Egypt. One of the most famous wrecks in the world. The SS Thistlegrom was doing its duty in World War II when it was shot down and sunk to the bottom of the ocean. But being a casualty of war was not what makes this ship so interesting. It's everything that was on board. Taking a dive down to this wreck is like stepping into a time machine. Old rifles, motorcycles, and army supplies are all stuffed away inside this wreckage. Some people say that salvaging some of the goods could be worth thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars, but the wreck is now a protected reef, so there's no way you can bring that stuff back to the surface without breaking the law. It's all looking and no touching. We have the MV Panagotis in Zakynthos Island, Greece. I can't believe it took us this long, but we finally made it to a pirate shipwreck. It's not an old school pirate shipwreck that has black sails and a bunch of scurvy-ridden hooligans who are constantly drunk on rum. No, this pirate ship was operating back in the 80s. It would come to a place known as Smuggler's Cove. This is considered the most beautiful beach in all of Greece. The waters are crystal clear, and the only way you can get there is by boat unless you can swim like Aquaman. This is why it was such a hot spot for smugglers to bring goods in and out of Greece. Well, one day the captain of the Panagotis was feeling a little bit bold and he brought the ship in way too close and it hit land. The crew did what they could to try and get the boat loose, but there was nothing they could do. It now sits on the shore of the beach as an added tourist attraction. And number 1 on the list is the SS Yonglanga, Queensland, Australia. Alright, grab your scuba gear because you're going to need to head underwater for this next wreck. If you want to visit this one, you're going to need your PADI certification because there is no way you're going to get face to face with this wreck unless you got a scuba tank or some serious freediving lungs. When the Yolanga went down, it was not a pretty sight. It was actually a tragedy and a very scary one at that. A cyclone came through when the boat was out at sea, and even though they had a skilled crew, nothing could handle the massive swells that were thrown at them. The ship was ripped down underwater and 122 people died in the wreck. On the bright side, the wreck is now teeming with life. In the 109 years that the ship has been sitting at the bottom of the ocean, it has collected a ton of coral and marine life that call it home. This place is a scuba paradise. You can see everything from octopuses, manta rays, sea turtles, to tiger sharks. Not to mention the whole wreck is covered head to toe in coral. Some say it is the most beautiful sunken ship in the world. Alright everyone, that has been our list, and as promised I'm going to be doing some more pet shoutouts. Remember, if you want me to shout out your pet, you can hit me up on Instagram. I pick new pets each day, so if you don't get picked one day, you can message back another day. I usually pick who has messaged most recently, and if it takes me a little while to get back to you, I am very sorry. I have a lot of these to do, and without taking any longer, let's get into this list. First up, we have the big ol' English bulldog, Feisty. Then we have the hamster, Bruce. Next, we have Duke, who looks like he's a little bit cranky.
Have the Mars, a Swedish warship that in its heyday would have been the biggest, most powerful vessel in the world. It ran and sank in the 1500s, after which its location remained unknown for more than 500 years. When the vessel set sail, it did so with a variety of advanced weapons on board, including cannons created by the melted remains of seized church bells, which had been taken by Eric XIV in an effort to reduce the strength of the church. Because of this sacrilegious act, the ship was deemed cursed, and when it sank 10 years later, in 1564, off of the coast of a Swedish island during a battle with the Danish forces, the curse proved to be true, I guess. The vessel went up in flames, taking around 900 soldiers with it, along with a bounty of gold and silver coins. For the next 500 years, it was believed that a ghost would continuously rise from the ship's watery grave in order to prevent its discovery, but it appears that even ghosts are no match for modern technology, because in 2011 it was found, and it became a pretty popular dive spot too, with divers who snuck pieces of the wreck back up to the surface, reporting that they could still smell the charred odor coming from the burnt wood. Don't do that, by the way. Do not take things from dive sites. It's not a good idea.
One of the most mysterious maritime cases is the disappearance of the entire crew of the MV Joyita. The MV Joyita was a fishing and charter boat that disappeared in the South Pacific in 1955. It was on its way from Apia, Samoa to the Tokla Islands, a trip that was supposed to take about 2 days. Now on board were 25 people, including experienced crew and passengers. The boat was discovered about 5 weeks after it had been reported missing and was drifting way off its planned route. There was no one on board. The boat was partially submerged and in really bad shape. Now, several things about the discovery made the whole situation even more mysterious. For one, the Joyita was found partially submerged, but it was actually built to be unsinkable, even with a full hold of water. It was a mystery how it got in such bad condition and why the crew would have left the ship knowing that it was unsinkable. None of the lifeboats were on the ship, which again means the people tried to escape, but none of them were ever found, and the cargo lookout was missing, which definitely means piracy could have played a role, but the mystery has never been 100% solved.
Next up, the German Wilhelm Gustloff, which sank in January of 1945 during World War II after being struck by a torpedo fired from a Soviet Navy submarine. The incident went down in history as being the deadliest isolated maritime disaster ever, with a record loss of an estimated 9,400 individuals, most of which would have been refugees. The vessel was originally designed to be a cruise ship, but it was repurposed for military use during the war. It was overcrowded when it sank, and so it went down fast. For years, both Germany and Russia downplayed the incident, but eventually the truth came out and the site was classified as a war grave. Based on my research, the area is prohibited, meaning that you can't actually dive there legally, but there have been cases in which divers have been given special permission to explore. Those who have gone down into the watery grave have come back with stories of feeling stripped of everything associated with humanity. It appears the energy of the deceased who passed during a tragic time in an incredibly tragic way is unavoidable.
And finally we have the Ellen Austin. Back in 1881, the schooner Ellen Austin set sail, cruising through the Atlantic near the Bermuda Triangle. The crew then spots another ship just floating there, a ghost ship without a crew. Captain Griffin and a small team boarded the ship to look around. There was precious cargo on board, but no crew anywhere to be found. There were also no signs of a struggle. Being a good Samaritan, or maybe just curious was he, Griffin decided to tow this abandoned ship back to port. So tie a rope they did. They start the tow and everything seems fine until out of the blue, a thick fog rolls in. And when the fog clears, the ghost ship be gone, vanished into thin air. So the captain decides to shake it off and continue on their hardy way, but a few days later, the same ghost ship be back. So they decide to give it another shot. They tie the ships together and once again, the mysterious fog rolls in. When it lifts, the ghost ship gone again.
On Monday, August 18th, around 4 a.m., a fisherman witnessed a massive flare light up the night sky off the coast of Sicily. When he went out to see where the distress call was coming from, all he found were cushions and floating planks of wood. He later learned that the distress signal had come from the luxury Bayesian super yacht owned by British millionaire Mike Lynch, who was celebrating winning a 12-year legal battle in which he was accused of fraud. While it was initially believed that the yacht sank in a mere 16 minutes due to sudden bad weather, authorities have begun to think that there is more to the story, and furthermore, that foul play might be involved. Out of the 22 people aboard the vessel, 12 passengers and 10 crew were able to make it onto lifeboats and were later rescued by a nearby sailing boat. The remaining, including Mike Lynch and his lawyer, Chris Marvolia, along with Lynch's daughter Hannah, Ricardo Thomas, Morgan Stanley, and Jonathan Bloomer, perished in the wreck. The investigation of exactly why the ship went down and how it all happened so quickly is still ongoing. While some claim the ship's captain, James Cutfield, to have been driving recklessly at the time the ship sank, the trade union Nautilus, which represents seafarers and captains, said any attempt to question his conduct without the full facts is not only unfair, but also harmful to the process of uncovering the truth and learning any lessons from this tragedy. To make matters even more questionable, just days before the yacht disaster in Italy, Mike Lynch's co-defendant, Stephen Chamberlain, was killed after being hit by a car while running in Cambridgeshire. Officers are urging eyewitnesses to come forward in relation to the incident involving Chamberlain so that they may also determine whether or not foul play was involved in his death. As of right now, there are no plans for the two investigations to intertwine, but as new evidence comes to light, it's entirely possible that they will. In 2003, Ignitis Renewals, a branch of a Lithuanian state-run energy company, stumbled across a 230-foot long, 20-foot high shipwreck in waters where less than 20 shipwrecks have been officially registered, while scouting for a place to build their offshore wind farm that ideally would eventually be able to replace approximately 1/4 of Lithuania's electricity demand with green energy. The vessel was located 125 feet below the surface of the water in a portion of the Baltic Sea that had, until Ignitis Renewables came along, never really been studied. After the company published their findings, Lithuanian officials admitted that they had
not been aware of the wreck prior to its recent discovery. The company then went on to confirm that no records of the sunken ship had previously been marked in any national databases. They also stated that further historical and archaeological research would be valuable for the country's scientific community and historians in regards to the wreck. Since the discovery, Ignitis Renewables has handed the investigation of the origins of the ship over to experts who will hopefully be able to provide some more details in the near future. In June of this year, 2024, researchers discovered a 3,300-year-old ship at the bottom of the Mediterranean Sea. The astonishing find was made 90 kilometers, approximately 56 miles from the shore, at a depth of 1.8 kilometers, about 1.1 miles. Aboard the ship were hundreds of intact jars or urns. The remains of the ancient vessel were found during an environmental survey of the seabed by a London-owned natural gas production company, the head of which, Karnit Bahartim, was quoted saying that during the survey, an unusual sight of what seemed to be a large cluster of urns was discovered, a sensational discovery more than any of us could have ever imagined, end quote. After the initial discovery, the urns were extracted from the wreck, which experts believe would have probably contained oil, wine, and other agricultural products like fruit, indicating that the passage of the ocean where the ship was found was likely used as a maritime trade route back in 1300 BC. As it is the first and earliest shipwreck discovered to date in the deep sea in the eastern Mediterranean, experts are hoping to learn much more about the vessel as the year unfolds. The SS Kamloops was a Canadian lake freighter that belonged to a fleet of Canadian steamship lines that launched back in the 1920s. It sank on December 6 of 1927 in Lake Superior off Isle Royale, Michigan. One person who managed to avoid going down with the ship, a young stewardess named Alice Bettridge, who later perished from exposure, wrote, "I am the last one left alive, freezing and starving to death on the Isle Royale in Lake Superior. I just want mom and dad to know my fate." The message was found the following year stuffed in a bottle. Many others did manage to make it to the shores of Isle Royale, but they all died shortly after, either due to hypothermia or wolf attacks. A number of others went down with the sinking ship, one of which remains to this day inside of the hull of the SS Kamloops, which has since its fall become quite a popular spot for experienced divers. Keyword being experienced, guys, this is a very difficult dive. Old Whydah is the name given to the corpse preserved by the cold temperatures of Lake Superior, which many divers have claimed to have seen following them around the hull of the ship. It's not just a ghost story though. Old Whydah is a real corpse located on the wreck, although he has become rather fragile over the years, and so it is unlikely he will last much longer. The Mars was in its heyday the largest and most powerful vessel in the world. It was a Swedish warship that ran and sank back in the 1500s. For more than 500 years, its location remained unknown until it was discovered back in 2011. During its time at sea, the vessel was equipped with a variety of weapons. I don't know why I did that. A variety of weapons, including cannons created by the melted remains of church bells that had been seized by Eric XIV in an effort to reduce the strength of the Catholic Church. This led to many people believing that the ship was cursed to sink, and as it turns out, those people were correct. Just 10 years after its maiden voyage, the ship went under during a battle with Danish forces, taking around 900 soldiers and a bounty of silver and gold coins along with it. After its rediscovery, the shipwreck became a pretty popular dive spot, with many divers who snuck pieces off of the wreck and back up to the surface reporting to have been suddenly struck with a string of particularly bad luck. Today, the wreck remains located 75 meters, 246 feet beneath the surface of the ocean, around 22 kilometers, 14 miles off the coast of New Eastland. You can still visit, but I certainly don't recommend taking anything. The USS Samuel B. Roberts was a John C. Butler class destroyer escort for the United States Navy that was active during the Second World War. The ship went down on October 25th of 1944 after being hit by 3 shells fired from the Japanese battleship Kongo, which tore a 12-mile, 40-foot long and 3-mile, 10-foot wide hole in the port side of the ship's aft engine room. It took the ship a total of 30 minutes to sink. 90 crew members perished either inside of the ship or alongside it in the vast waters of the Philippine Sea. For years, the exact location of the wreck remained unknown until the ship was rediscovered on June 22nd of 2022 at a depth of, bear with me, 6,895 meters, 22,621 feet, making it the deepest wreck ever to be identified to date. The wreck was discovered by Victor Vescovo, a Texas businessman who came across the abandoned vessel in his 2-man submarine, The Limiting Factor. After the discovery, Vescovo was quoted describing the battle that ended in explain the ship's relocation from above to below the ocean, saying it was just an extraordinary act of heroism. Those men on both sides were fighting to the death. End quote. Now, prior to that rediscovery of the USS Samuel B. Roberts, the deepest known shipwreck ever found in the ocean was none other than the USS Johnston, which sank during the Battle of Samar after Japanese battleship Yamato fired armor-piercing ammunition at the ship on October 25th of 1944. After the sustained and intense damage, the USS Johnston began to split apart, and eventually the entire thing was dragged down to the depths of Leyte Gulf in the Philippines. The location of the wreck remained unknown for about 77 years until it was eventually rediscovered on March 31st of 2021 at a depth of 21,180 feet or 6,460 meters. For a while, it remained the deepest wreck ever discovered by man, of course, until the more recent discovery of the USS Samuel B. Roberts in 2022, which out-depthed, if that's a word, the USS Johnson by 1,441 feet, approximately 439 meters. The SS American Star, originally named the SS America, was built in 1936 by the United States Line. For the next 23 years, the vessel served as one of the fastest passenger ships on the ocean. During the Second World War, the ship was used as a Navy vessel and was renamed the USS West Point. In 1946, it once again became a passenger ship until it was sold in 1964 to the Chandris Group, which renamed it Australis. In 1978, the vessel was sold to Venture Cruises, which renamed the ship America, but later that year it was seized by the United States and sold at auction, repurchased again by the Chandris Group, who refitted the ship and renamed it to Italis. However, 2 years later, in 1980, it was sold to Intercommerce Corporation, who renamed the vessel SS Noga and began renovating it to become a prison ship. However, shortly after renovations began, it was sold to Silver Moon Ferries and renamed, yet again, Alfredos. Eventually, the ship began experiencing mechanical problems and it was sold for scrapping, but in 1993, the ship was saved from scrapping by a company with plans to refit the ship into the hotel. It was then given its final name, the American Star, and it was towed to Trinidad for renovation, except it never made it to Trinidad because a thunderstorm and low tides caused the vessel to run aground and break in two. Talk about a rough go. For many years, the American Star was a go-to spot for divers, but by 2008, the tides had reduced it to nothing more than an unrecognizable pile of steel, and today, nothing more remains than a few broken pieces. The Edmund Fitzgerald took its maiden voyage on the Great Lakes back in June of 1958, and it spent the next 17 years working hard to become one of the most powerful freight carriers in the area. On November 9th of 1975, the vessel departed from Superior, Wisconsin and attempted to make its way over to Zug Island on the Detroit River while carrying 26,000 tons of taconite pellets. It never made it. The following day, winds of up to 60 miles per hour and waves up to 10 feet, 3 meters high, surrounded the ship. This is when the Edmund Fitzgerald reached out to its convoy partner, the SS Arthurs Anderson, with a distress call. The radio person on the Fitzgerald was heard saying, "Don't let anybody on deck," and that they had lost both of their radars and were taking heavy seas over the deck. In the end, the Fitzgerald went down, taking all 29 crew members with it. The wreck was discovered not long after, on November 14th of 1975 by the US Navy using a remotely operated vehicle, who confirmed that the vessel had in fact broken right into two, and it was now lying at the bottom of the lake with its cargo scattered all around it. The first man to visit the wreck was Jean-Michel Cousteau in the 1980s in a submarine. Many expeditions followed, one of which was able to locate the remains of one of the ship's former crewmen. In the 2000s, in an effort to protect the site from looters, both the US and Canada decided to declare the wreck an archaeological site. So, unfortunately, if you want to visit, you're gonna have to plan ahead and get yourself a permit first.
USS Saratoga. Built in the late 1920s, this ship fought its fair share of World War II battles, but after 20 years of service, it finally met its demise during nuclear weapon testing at Bikini Atoll. The ship was able to hold up to the first round of firing, but the second test, named Test Baker, an underwater blast which was detonated, and the force of the explosion lifted the vessel out of the water water before it crashed down into the sea, where it remains to this day. Ever since, the submerged wreck has become a scuba diving destination, as it's not terribly deep beneath the surface, but even so, it is not for the faint of heart. Some divers that have visited claim to feel an evil presence when they're near the ship, and some even claim to have been grabbed by an unseen force while they were trying to make it back up to the surface. So, on the off chance, if you do decide to take a dive, don't say I didn't warn you. Coming in at number 9, the oldest recorded wreckage. When it comes to cursed and terrifying things, usually the older it is, the creepier. And I have to say that this ship is no exception. So the world's oldest known shipwreck has been discovered sitting at the bottom of the Black Sea, and it's estimated that the ship has been in the same spot for roughly 2,400 years, which is wild. Now, I think that the creepiest part of all of this is that we have no real backstory about how this ship ended up here, what happened in its final moments before it sank to the bottom of the ocean, or how many people went down with it. So while we may never know exactly what went down all those years ago, one thing we do know is that there is a dark and sinister energy surrounding the ship that should not be messed with. You never know what kind of ancient curse could accidentally be uncovered if you aren't careful. Coming in at our number 8 spot, the SS Valencia. On January 22nd, 1906, the Valencia was en route from San Francisco to Seattle when suddenly it snagged on a submerged reef on the southwest coast of Vancouver Island. Tragically, many of the rescuers were thwarted by the jagged, uncharted rocks and fierce storm, and many lifeboats capsized in the rolling waters. So for the next 36 hours, passengers clung to the deck while rescuers attempted to get them to safety, until a giant wave swept 99 out of the 137 passengers out to sea in a disastrous shock. Ever since the tragic incident, reports of strange occurrences, including ghostly apparitions and eerie sounds, have been linked to the cursed shipwreck. But most disturbing are the claims from sailors on the west coast of Vancouver Island who've reported seeing a phantom ship floundering in the waves. And it's said that while its terrified passengers and crew appear still holding on for dear life, screaming out for help, they are just waiting for anyone to pass by so they can drag you down with them.
The Clotilda is one of the most disturbing shipwrecks ever discovered. In 1860, more than 50 years after the United States banned the transatlantic slave trade, a wealthy Alabama businessman illegally purchased and smuggled more than 100 Africans aboard the Clotilda. To hide evidence of the crime, the captain secretly sailed up the Mobile River, unloaded the captives, and then burned and sank the ship. For more than 150 years, the wreck was missing, and then in 2018, archaeologists positively identified the remains of the Clotilda. What they found confirmed the stories survivors had passed down for generations: the burned wood, the compact hull built specifically for human cargo, iron fastenings that had warped in intense heat. The discovery proved that the ship had been intentionally destroyed to cover up the illegal trafficking of enslaved people. No human remains were found inside, but the structure itself was evidence of an atrocity. The Clotilda is now considered one of the most important archaeological finds in American history. In 1857, the SS Central America was carrying nearly 15 tons of gold from California when it sank in a hurricane off the Carolina coast. More than 400 people died. The wreck became known as the Ship of Gold. For over a century, no one knew exactly where it was, and then in 1988, a deep-sea exploration team located the ship 7,000 feet below the surface. The conditions preserved the interior incredibly well. Divers found coins stacked in piles, gold bars fused into bricks by sediment, clothing that still held its shape, even sealed bottles of 1850s perfume that still had a scent. But the most haunting discovery involved the personal items: a leather bag filled with gold dust and nuggets, frozen in the exact shape created by the owner's hands, a pair of boots still standing upright, a man's pocket watch frozen at the exact moment it was exposed to salt water. The SS Central America remains one of the most valuable and emotionally powerful shipwrecks ever uncovered. La Trinité was the flagship of a French fleet sent to Florida in 1565 to challenge Spanish settlements. According to historical records, a hurricane drove the ship onto the coastline where it broke apart and sank. For nearly 500 years, the wreck was missing, and then in 2016, archaeologists found cannons and artifacts strongly linked to the ship. What they found inside was startling. The cannons showed signs of heavy combat use. Ceremonial weapons indicated the presence of French officers, but the most chilling artifacts were the personal items found scattered in strange patterns. A sword bent at an unnatural angle, suggesting it was trapped between collapsing timbers. A breastplate dented inward, a helmet split along the top as if struck by debris. These items painted a picture of a violent, chaotic end. Rather than a peaceful sinking, the ship appeared to have been torn apart while the crew fought to survive both the storm and the wreck itself. The site is now protected as a grave for the men who died here. Blackbeard, one of the most feared pirates in history, captured a French slave ship in 1717 and renamed it the Queen Anne's Revenge. It became his flagship. A year later, it ran aground near Beaufort, North Carolina. When archaeologists began recovering the wreck in the late 1990s and early 2000s, they found a wide range of items that revealed the true nature of Blackbeard's operations. Weapons were everywhere: cannons, musket parts, grenades, and even makeshift explosives. Medical tools suggested that the ship's surgeon performed amputations and other emergency procedures. A pewter syringe was found that may have been used for treating infections, but the most disturbing finds were lengths of rope and restraints that hinted at prisoners being held on board. Combined with the ship's history as a former slave vessel, the artifacts suggest that Queen Anne's Revenge was a place where violence was common and often brutal. For historians, the wreck validated centuries of stories passed down about Blackbeard's cruelty. In 1941, the SS Gare Sapa, a British cargo ship carrying tons of tea, iron, and more than 2,000 bars of silver, was torpedoed by a German U-boat in the North Atlantic. The ship sank in icy water more than 3 miles deep. Most of the crew died trying to escape in lifeboats, and only one survivor ever made it home. In 2011, a deep-sea exploration company located the wreck and began recovery operations. What they found inside was astonishing. Much of the silver was still intact. The ship's cargo hold looked almost untouched, but the most eerie discovery came from the interior stairways. Disturbances in the sediment and the position of collapsed metal suggested that several crew members tried to move through the ship in absolute darkness as it was sinking. Personal items recovered from the wreck, including a shattered pocket watch and fragments of clothing, supported the idea that men were trapped inside during the final moments. The silver recovery was the largest in world history, but for many researchers, it was the evidence of human struggle inside the wreck that left the biggest impact.
In our number 5 spot today, we have the Joseph Stalin. The Joseph Stalin was, of course, a Soviet passenger ship that was converted to carry troops during the Second World War. The ship was very important to Soviet forces as it was used in 1941 in the evacuation of Tallinn and was later used to evacuate the Soviet naval base in Hanko, Finland. Just after this evacuation, on December 3rd, 1941, the ship ended up entering the Gulf of Finland, where it encountered 3 German mines. This led to the crew scrambling around to try and fix up the damage that the mines had caused. While they were distracted by this, Finnish forces ended up spotting the ship and saw an opportunity to strike. This led to the ammunition that was on board the Soviet ship to detonate, which ended up taking the lives of 3,849 out of the 5,589 who were on board. Those who didn't lose their lives in this incident ended up being captured and held as prisoners of war by the German forces. In our number 4 spot today, we have the SS Cap Arcona. This ship was a German luxury ocean liner that was launched in 1927. But by the time the mid-1940s rolled around, however, like many other ships on this list, this one was put to use to help in the country's war efforts. This time, this ship was converted into a prison ship. In April of 1945, with the advance of the British Army, prisoners being held at concentration camps were being loaded onto ships, and the Cap Arcona was one of them. On May 3rd, 1945, with more than 6,000 people on board, the ship was attacked by the British Air Force. The prisoners on board were being held below deck at the time, and the ship was not marked with any sort of red cross, so unfortunately those in the British Air Force did not realize that the ship was filled with prisoners at the time. The ship capsized but did not sink entirely, but still this wreck caused somewhere around 5,000 deaths. In our number 3 spot today we have the HMS Armenia. This was a Soviet passenger ship that was first launched in November of 1928, and she had a maximum capacity of 980 passengers. During the Second World War, this ship was put to use by transporting troops, and from October 9th, 1941, the ship was used to evacuate soldiers, workers, and materials from Odessa. In November of 1941, there was the invasion of German troops that led to an extreme rush to evacuate the hospitals in the city of Sevastopol, and the Armenia was repurposed again into a hospital ship. This led to about 4,000 wounded people and medical personnel from 11 different hospitals being loaded onto the ship to set sail towards Yalta. Once there, another 1,000 passengers were loaded onto the ship in a rush, none of which were officially recorded. On November 7th, the ship was attacked by a German Heinkel HE-111, and in just 4 minutes the ship sadly sank, taking the lives of almost everyone on board. Just 8 people survived the entire ordeal. In German records there is no mention that the Armenia was a hospital ship, so it's unclear if they omitted that tale or if they mistakenly believed that it was a troop carrier. Either way, it is absolutely devastating. In our number 2 spot today we have the Arctic. This ship made its maiden transatlantic voyage in 1850, and it was best known for its speed. This ship was able to cross the Atlantic in just 9 days. On September 27, 1854, the ship was sailing from Liverpool to New York City when it collided with a French steamship called the Vesta. This occurred in the thick fog that was found just off of Cape Race, Newfoundland. At first it appeared as though the Vesta had received more damage in the collision, but soon the captain of the Arctic realized that the ship was rapidly taking on seawater. He decided to abandon the Vesta and head for land in order to save his passengers, but once he left the other ship, the damaged Arctic continued to take on water, which then put out the furnaces and caused engines to stop working. This is when the captain ordered that those who were the most vulnerable be placed into the lifeboats first, but instead a number of crew and male passengers dashed towards the lifeboats, leaving hundreds of people to go down with the ship. There were about 400 people on board the ship that day, and only 87 of them survived. 22 of the survivors were passengers and the rest crew. The captain went down with the ship, but he managed to stay alive by clinging to some wreckage until rescue came. The other ship, the Vesta, did not sink and ended up making it to St. John's, Newfoundland. The crew members who abandoned everyone else on the ship were criticized for their behavior, which violated the laws that forbid sailors to put their own safety before that of passengers in emergencies. Despite this, however, none of the men were prosecuted for their actions. In our number 1 spot today we have the RMS Lancastria. This ship was a British ocean liner, but in April of 1940 she was reconstructed to be a troop ship under the command of Captain Rudolph Sharp. He sent the ship off to help aid in the evacuation of British troops and citizens from France, and on June 14, 1940, the ship departed from Liverpool. On June 16th, the ship anchored near the town of St. Nazaire, and the following day, somewhere between 4,000 and 9,000 refugees loaded on board. This included civilians, soldiers, and other military officials. While carrying all of these people, around 4 p.m. on June 17th, the German Junkers Ju-88 the ship, which caused it to capsize and sink in an extremely fast 20 minutes. This caused over 1,400 tons of fuel to leak into the water, some parts catching fire, and while there were 2,477 survivors, no one is quite sure how many people lost their lives. This is because it was obviously a hectic rescue mission that had people rushing aboard. No one is quite sure just how many people were on board before the attack happened. It is thought that somewhere from 4,000 to 6,500 people might have lost their lives during this, which is truly a terrifying number.
Starting off our list today, we have the SS Kamloops, which comes equipped with ghosts and a real live floating corpse. Going by the nickname Old Whitey, the corpse is that of a crewman who worked on the vessel back in the 1920s. On December 6th of 1927, in the middle of a violent storm, the Kamloops was last seen afloat, coated in a thick sheet of ice. When the ship went down, some crew members managed to escape and make their way back to the shores of Isle Royale, but they died shortly after due to either hypothermia or wolf attack. Those who were unable to escape the ship went down into the depths of Lake Superior. Due to the cold temperatures of the water and the fact that there is relatively minimal marine life hanging out at the bottom of the lake, much of what sank in the ship remained with it: leather shoes, clothing, jewelry, and of course, old whydah. Many divers who have visited the wreck have even reported the preserved corpse following them around the ship as though it were alive, and in some instances, divers have said that it even reached out and touched them while they were passing through the interior of the vessel. It's a pretty creepy sight to see. The body is so far gone it's almost translucent, and I think if you touched it, it would kind of just turn to powder. But it's there, so if you're an experienced diver, feel free to check it out and let me know how it goes.
Next up, we have what might be one of the creepiest seafaring tales that I've ever heard. Honestly, the tale of the SS Orang Medan. Now, it's debated as to exactly what year this took place, but it was at some point in the 40s, anywhere between 1940 and 1948. The story goes that a couple of American ships sailing through the Straits of Malacca picked up distress signals from a Dutch merchant ship called the Orang Medan. The distress messages were pretty chilling, to say the least. The radio operator on the ship sent out an SOS in Morse code that read, "We float. All officers, including the captain, dead in chart room and on the bridge. Probably whole of crew dead." The last message simply said, "I die." When the crew of one of the American ships, the Silver Star, reached the Orang Medan to help, they found dead bodies everywhere. And the creepiest part, every single corpse's face was stuck in this terrified expression, staring up at the sky with open mouths and wide eyes. Even stranger, there were no signs of injuries on the bodies. As the rescuers were trying to figure out what to do next, maybe even like tow the ship to port, a fire suddenly broke out in the cargo hold. The fire forced the rescue crew to leave the ship in a hurry, and shortly after they evacuated, the ship exploded and sank, taking whatever secrets it had down with it.
Next up, we have the Salem Express, which some consider to be the most haunted shipwreck in the world. I mean, Salem's in the name, so I already buy it. In 1991, the ferry became stuck on a reef while making its way through the open ocean near Egypt. In 10 minutes, the entire ship was underwater, and it dragged 470 passengers to their deaths. The locals of Egypt refused to dive the wreck, believing that it is not only incredibly haunted, but also protected by jinns, invisible spirits from another world capable of causing physical and mental harm to humans. One scuba diver, who goes by the name of Scuba Dan, decided to brave the wreck, diving down 45 meters into the waters off Egypt. While on board, he saw abandoned cargo, clothing, and bags of toys. At one point, he found an air pocket on the ship, and he decided to poke his head up. When he does this, the sounds of demonic moans can be heard, and throughout the entire dive, he said it felt as though he was being followed. It was super creepy. I probably wouldn't recommend visiting this one, but if you do, you know what to do.
Here's a more contemporary one, the ghost yacht. This is a very creepy story. I mean, centuries old shipwrecks are creepy as well, but stories from the distant past can often be embellished, a bit like a game of broken telephone. This case happened in 2007 though. So on April 15th of 2007, 3 men set sail from Arley Beach in Queensland, Australia, on a catamaran called the Kaz 2. They were just going for a cruise. On April 18th, the catamaran was spotted drifting near the Great Barrier Reef by a helicopter. Rescue teams were dispatched, and they found the yacht in good condition, but eerily empty. The engine was still running, a laptop was open, and a meal had been made, but was untouched. There were no signals of a struggle either. Authorities launched an investigation to figure out what happened to the crew. The last known footage of them, taken by a marina's security camera, showed nothing unusual. The final moments on the yacht are still a complete mystery. Maybe one of the men fell overboard and the others drowned trying to save him. Some have even speculated a freak wave could have swept the men overboard, or that they were kidnapped by pirates, but till this day, we still really don't know.
I like the idea of a wave sweeping over and leaving the meal untouched. It could happen, you know? Totally. Next on the list, we have the RMS Rhone, a 94-meter Royal Mail ship that sunk just off the coast of Salt Island in 1867 in the British Virgin Islands after a massive wave knocked the captain overboard to his death. And then strong winds caused the vessel to crash into a set of jagged rocks, which then caused damage to the boiler room, which caused an explosion, which caused the vessel to be torn in half. rough day at sea. Only 28 members of the 146-man crew survived. Since the incident, the wreck has actually become one of the most popular diving spots in the world, which makes sense. The waters of the BVIs are literally stunning. Those who decide to explore the vessel will be met with beautifully clear waters, a variety of marine life, a variety of artifacts, and also ghosts. The most haunted place on the ship is the hull, where the majority of the passengers were rumored to be while the boat sank. Divers have reported hearing groans and screams while exploring this area, as well as having their shoulders touched despite having no one near them at the time. And many divers have claimed that while ascending back to the surface, they have seen people frantically swimming after them below, desperate for air, but when the divers go back down to help, all of a sudden these swimmers disappear into thin air. Or water, I guess.
Next up, we have the eerie discovery of the Octavius. So this three-masted schooner had left England in 1761 on a journey somewhere to the east. Now, they managed to reach their destination, but on their return journey in 1762, they decided to take a chance sailing through the Northwest Passage. Now, 13 years later, the crew of a whaling ship named the Herald happened across a seemingly abandoned ship, drifting through the water just west of Greenland. The 5-man crew boarded the vessel. At first, they thought nobody was aboard. It wasn't until they reached the lower decks, though, that they discovered the remains of the crew who had been floating aimlessly for over a decade. The harsh cold had frozen their bodies solid, making them pretty well preserved, and the captain was found sitting at his desk. His pen was actually still in his hand. He'd just had written 13 years ago his final log in November of 1762.